Hi, this is Greg Farrar. It's June 21st, 2020. This is my COVID-19 trends live stream. I'll do a section on countries, then a section on states of the United States, and then a section on the counties of California. If you want more detail on any of the graphs I'm looking here, if you want to focus on a particular region that I'm not focusing on, these graphs are all available at gregferrar.us. gregferrar.us. Hopefully that's even visible in this live stream. Yeah, I think it's up at the upper right. You can come here. All these graphs, all I'm doing here is using that website. This entire live stream will be nothing but me using my own website to analyze and somewhat interpret the trends and the data. So, starting from the top, total cases by country, United States and Brazil continue to be the biggest ones among the countries, followed by Russia and India, as we mentioned some degree of detail. So I mentioned this on my blog yesterday, for instance. India, though it has a lot of cases, it's nowhere near the United States, but when adjusted for population, this number just disappears. India has such a large population that this number of cases is actually very small adjusted for population. But if you don't adjust for population, it does show up as number 4. Also worth noting here that both the United States and Russia and Brazil, and to some degree India, are showing their latest points above the trend line. This suggests they are all accelerating. Brazil has been looking good, or at least turning the corner towards looking good. These 2 points suggest that it may be headed in a bad direction again. Let's look at the cases per million. Total daily cases per million. Good way to compare countries or regions. 100 per million makes it a warm spot. 200 per million makes it a hot spot in daily cases. You can see we have a number of hot spots right now worldwide. 6 of them, I think. Qatar and Bahrain have been our hottest spots for a long time now. But both of them, Bahrain is visibly leveling out, and Qatar has long since peaked and is heading down fairly sharply. So those will not be our hot spots for long, or our hottest spots. Chile looks like it's just about to pass Bahrain, and probably in another week or so, Qatar as well. So you hear a lot about Brazil, but Chile actually has it a lot worse. Chile at 350 daily cases per million, that's a big number. 200 is enough to be called a hot spot in my nomenclature, and so 350 is a very hot spot. Not as much as the ridiculously hot that we had in Qatar, or the even more ridiculously hot, well above 1,000 we had in New York a few months ago, but still, this is the world's, probably the worst looking country in the world right now, arguably, at least according to this graph, is Chile, because it's headed upwards, at least somewhat. We'll see. Maybe there's a little bit of a bend in that too. Actually, let's just pop down to the rope chart and see what Chile looks like in growth. If you look at the direction Chile is trending, not so bad. It's certainly lagging behind Qatar and Bahrain. Qatar has long since crossed zero and is shrinking quickly, something like 5% a day. Bahrain has also crossed zero and is also shrinking quickly. Chile, not quite. It's not quite down to zero, so its daily cases are still rising very slightly, 0.4% per day right now. The most recent 3 days have all been negative, so really this is looking pretty good for Chile as well. It may be the worst in the world right now, but it is all 3 of these are recovering, and including Chile. It's a little behind in its recovery, behind these 2, but it caught the epidemic later than they did. These were much earlier peaks. The other 3 that are almost hot, I'm going to zoom in so I can pick them out more easily. Yeah, all right. So officially hot are Oman and Panama, and slightly maybe hot is Armenia. 200 is a lot. 200 daily cases per million, that's a lot. Though, again, we've seen thousands sometimes. But these are rising as well at the moment. However, let's take a look. Was that Oman, Armenia, and Panama, maybe? Panama, interesting, Panama. Yeah, so Panama's rising on that in total daily cases. It's rising pretty quickly, 3% per day, but at least we have this downward trend of the graph saying that its growth rate is dropping. If it's 3% today, it might be 2.5 tomorrow and 2 the next, and so on downward until eventually it crosses zero and the daily cases actually start shrinking. So Panama doing okay. It's still got a high growth rate, but at least it's trending towards zero growth. These two doing quite well at this point. Oman and Armenia just having crossed the zero line, they're now shrinking. Brazil had crossed zero. Let's take a close look at Brazil, because Brazil had crossed zero. If we looked at the graph yesterday or the day before, it had crossed zero. The trend line is now not so sure, not nearly so sure that Brazil is crossing zero, and we can see why. This point, which represents the 7 days ending yesterday roughly, showed 16% average daily growth. That's an extraordinarily high growth rate to have, especially as an average of 7 days. So that's a real problem. And the 7 days ending today is a 6% daily growth rate, also a high growth rate. Over 5% makes it a growth hotspot. So Brazil, which was looking good, has a couple of days that are pretty problematic. Not enough to make a trend. Might just be noise. We'll keep watching. But at least at this point, the trend line, it's still pointed downward, the Brazilian trend line. So, and it has been for a long time now. So for the most part, Brazil is tending in the right direction, but we do have those 2 points that are starting to make us wonder. Saudi Arabia, as I've mentioned, the trend line says it's going upward, but I think any kindergartner would see that it's really going downward. It just has waved around a lot. The last 2 weeks, Saudi Arabia clearly trending downward in an extended, sustained way, and probably hitting zero right now. The trend line algorithms just pretty much got it wrong, I think. Peru, or rather Kuwait, is long since crossed zero and is shrinking. Peru, long since crossed zero and is shrinking and accelerating in its shrinkage rate. We have to get all the way down to Moldova to see a country that's actually looking bad in growth. Is that right? No, we also had Saudi Arabia. No, that's right. Saudi Arabia is the one that really, the trend line just isn't right. It's not moving quickly. It's not noticing the short-term fluctuations that have happened there. So Moldova isn't terrible, but it's kind of terrible. It's a growth hotspot and it's rising very slightly. So that's pretty bad. But all the other hottest countries in daily cases most of them have shrunk. We've been watching this trend now for a week or so. It's really just developed over the past week that the hottest countries are shrinking in growth rate, and many of them now are shrinking in total numbers. So they may be daily cases hotspots. There are a bunch of daily cases hotspots and quite a few warm ones as well, like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and so on, Peru. But when you actually look at what direction they're trending, though they have a lot of cases each day, the trend looks good. These lines are, many of them below zero, and they're headed downward, which is all we can ask. If it's below zero and headed downward, we're golden. That's as good as it gets. And then a few that aren't. Let's just keep going. Sweden was in trouble, but is looking like it's maybe turning a little bit of a corner. Sweden had an odd surge. No, that's Brazil. This is probably, no, that's also Brazil. Yeah, Sweden, it's alone among the European countries. It is slightly warm and also growing, so it's not looking so great. The United States, though, is really not looking great. After a period of dropping for many weeks, the United States was dropping on average every day in new cases. The United States turned the corner back towards growth in early June, around June 3rd, and it has been steadily growing and accelerating ever since. We have a day now. The most recent 7 days average to 5% growth rate for the United States as a whole, which makes the United States, at least for this past week, a growth hotspot. The United States is looking quite bad, a growth hotspot, and as far as we can tell, accelerating. So maybe the United States is the worst country in the world right now. It kind of looks that way. Who was it? Moldova versus the United States? Yeah, I guess Moldova's got a little worse, but not a whole lot. The United States has have this 5% point recently, and Moldova has been lower than that recently. So Moldova. I'm just going to look at all of the top 25. We have a couple of bad ones in the top 25. Honduras. Oh wow, this is new. Mauritania, not a country I'm very familiar with. We do see the smaller countries rising here, and that in some sense is a good sign because it means the larger countries are no longer warm. They're so cool now, so cooled off. Europe and Asia for the most part, and Europe and Asia, where it was worst. They're so cooled off now that the only ones that are looking bad are some of these rather small countries. But Chile's at the top of the list right now in daily cases, but at least it's recovering. So yeah, I think I can reasonably say that the United States, maybe Moldova, are the worst right now in the world as the overall picture goes, which is to say, they're warm. Where's the United States? Well, the United States probably isn't quite warm. Let's see. I don't think I've actually looked at this today. Yeah, so look at that. For the longest time, I've been saying, well, the United States is doing all right. It's down here at 65, 70. Look at this mini trend, though. Look at that. I always say 1 point doesn't mean anything. 2 points is might be a coincidence. 3 points is starting to be a habit, and 4 is really a trend. We have a mini trend now that's gone on for 6 days in the United States. Each of these. These are single days, not averages of weeks, I believe. So it had 60 daily cases per million. That's not bad. 73, also not terrible. 79, 85, 92 or 93. That's starting to be bad. And finally, we have our latest day. The United States, for the first time in my data set. Now, that's not quite true. It also did it back while it was descending from a higher place. The United States is, for the most recent day, appears to be a daily cases warm spot. It's not enough points up there to say whether it's going to continue this way to really call it a trend, but certainly an alarmingly sharp, linear shot upwards. And we've been seeing all these states, Arizona and the like, the Gang of 6, the Gang of 8, which are shooting upwards. And this is why we're seeing this now on the country level. And similarly, 5% growth. And this one is definitely averaged over 7 days. 5% over 7 days. That's bad news for the United States. Things are looking bad for the United States. And I think I will say it's the worst in the nation, in the country. If you look at the overall chart, this is a total mess as always. This chart is just something where we can take a very far away look at the countries of the world and say, are they growing? Are they shrinking? Are they accelerating? Are they decelerating? The zero lines here, Brazil apparently right on that zero line, and it's about even. Half the country's growing, half shrinking. We have some more extreme cases on the upside with Croatia and Palestine, which have extremely sharp upward acceleration. And then on the bottom, we've got Estonia and Chad. Those are really outliers. The general pack here, as usual, is from -10 to 10, and it's about even. So the world is sort of balanced in whether it's growing or shrinking. But when you look at it on the world's rope chart, the thread chart, on average, 1.5% growth in the world. It was starting to look a little bit better, but now it's had 3 of the last 4 days looking fairly bad. And that may be the United States' fault, because the United States is as we see, the major contributor of total cases to the world is the United States. If the United States grows by 5%, the world's going to tend to grow by 1% just from that or so. Testing, as always, looking pretty good. Daily testing, you can take a look at how the United States is doing as a whole in daily testing. The United States is doing well as a whole in daily testing, over 0.15% of the population each day, which is California's standard, at least, for doing well. The Central South America cluster does seem to be dying away. The testing data here isn't very good. I don't really believe it. But let's just briefly look at the Central South America cluster, because that was the news about 3 weeks ago, and it really isn't anymore. I mean, it sort of is. Chile's at the top. I think the United States is the news now, worldwide. Panama, Brazil. Certainly there are still a lot of Central South America. There's a lot of Central and South America here in the top 10 or so. But they're all, half of the 4 that I picked out anyway, are headed downward. Brazil, again, barely turning the corner. It seems, though, with those bad points, everyone angled downward. So Central South America seems to be shrinking. It seems to be heading towards recovery, and at least in the case of Peru, it's solidly in the area of recovery. And it seemed to me there was another Central South American country here that maybe isn't even here anymore. Anyway, so that's the world news. The world news, I guess, could be summed up here. The world news is the world is growing in new cases. It's a growth warm spot, more than 1%. The world as a whole is growing more than 1% a day. That's a pretty high growth rate. The United States, though, seems to be trying to reach it to 5%, which would really be a high growth rate. Moving on to the states of the United States. So, we don't talk about New York anymore. It has more cases than any one total, but it's just doing very well. You can see that still, its dots are still below the trend line, indicating that it's still slowing down. On this graph, we can look for, and same with Illinois, same with New Jersey, we can look for those where the dots are above the trend line. Those are the trouble spots. California, by the way, Massachusetts is doing okay, Texas, Florida, and there are some others that are buried down here. Let's just zoom in a little bit. We'll be able to see these better, but there's just these really notable features on this graph. These ones that have just bust away from their trend line. 3 or 4 of them, 6 of them, probably the gang of 6. Texas, actually, not part of the gang of 6. Florida, also not part of the gang of 6, but I really think we're going to see them join in. Georgia, also not part of the gang of 6. What is this? There's Arizona, finally. You have to get way down there to find it. North Carolina. Yeah, we'll see this better on the other graphs. So I'm gonna head on down to the daily cases per million. Adjusted for population, what are the hotspot states? Well, hotspot is 200. There's only one hotspot, but Arizona made it. They were trying and they got there. Arizona is officially a hotspot at 230 daily cases per million. That's not an extremely high number of cases. We've seen, as you saw, Qatar was at 600 or 700. New York was at maybe 1,400 at its very peak. So these still are not world record numbers. But above 200 is hot. We don't see it that much. And in some sense, that means the United States is doing okay because it only has one hotspot in daily cases. But if these trends continue, it'll be picking up dozens of hotspots or a dozen hotspots in the next couple of weeks. Will these trends continue? I don't know. But here we have Arizona, Arkansas. I'm going to actually just show just those ones. Rhode Island it was so high for so long that it still shows up in our numbers here, but it is not a problem anymore. Its trend line is terrific. Things are great in Rhode Island. Not so in Arizona, Arkansas, the AAA, Alabama, all of those doing poorly. All of them warm spots, above 100 daily cases per million. North and South Carolina, also warm spots. Utah, also a warm spot. Let's look at Georgia. Nope, Georgia hasn't made it yet. Georgia did have a warm day. Where is this latest day? Oh, okay. Georgia had a really warm day. Its most recent day. Let's focus on Georgia. This is just a very short upward trend, not enough to say that it's anything real yet, but for now, worth noting, this Georgia will definitely be a watch spot for us. We're going to keep our eyes on Georgia because though it's not even warm yet in total cases, it doesn't have that many cases, according to or adjusted for population. It has had 2 days now that are warm and then really warm. Florida also has been, oh wow, look at that. Look at that. Florida's looking terrible. We kind of knew that. Florida's been making the news and it's just been looking worse and worse. But up here we have a hot spot day at 280. That was 3 days ago. And the next day, 2 days ago, 185, almost a hot spot. And then the next day, today, or yesterday I guess, because this stuff lags by a day or so, almost 200, almost a hot spot. So Florida's looking bad. It has a pretty obvious trend here. The trend line doesn't notice it, and the trend line says, no, we're just at 73, but I think we can look at this and say, yeah, we know these trend lines take a while to catch up, and there's something sharply upward happening in Florida here. So Florida belongs, I think, in the gang of 6. Let's look at Texas. Texas looking a little troubled. It certainly is no Florida, but it did have 4 days ago, I think this is. It had a hot spot day. It's had 3 warm days recently. Not enough to pull the trend upward. So Texas, we can still hope for the best there. It may be that this is all just a scattering of noise, and it'll be back on its trend line or even below, and it'll shrink and never get warm. But according to the trend line, Texas is not yet warm, but I have my doubts looking at those points. Texas also looking to join the gang of 5 or 8 or 6. Okay, here's California, also like Texas, not yet quite warm according to its trend line at 91, but it did have 1 warm spot day. California is on the brink of hitting warm. It really looks like it will in the next few days unless something shifts radically. Not in the gang of however many. So here's the gang. Florida, just because it has those crazy high days, even though its trend line doesn't call for it yet, really belongs in this crew. Texas, probably not. Maybe. Tennessee, Louisiana. Yeah, the rest are small. So what do we got? We do have a gang of 8 now, really. If we're going to include Georgia and Florida. What was Georgia's story again? Yeah, Georgia's kind of a close, but not quite. So maybe not Georgia, but Florida is rising faster than anyone else. So those are our 7 problem spots right now. Arizona, Arkansas, South Carolina, Alabama, Utah, Florida, North Carolina, AAA, the Carolinas, Utah, and now Florida is really bursting onto the scene. Let's look at these in the context of their growth rates. Arizona, Arkansas, the Carolinas, Alabama, Florida. Utah's still there. It looked for a minute like Utah might fall out of the top 7. But we'll see. Let's zoom in a little bit and look at just these really hot spots, the hottest spots. Okay, all right. So Utah. Where is Utah? Now Utah's looking bad. Actually, it had a moment of looking good. There are 2 here that look a little better than the others, which is Alabama and North Carolina. I think North Carolina it's never quite been South Carolina. It wants to be South Carolina, but it can't quite raise the slope. And so North Carolina, certainly not great at 2% daily, but it's trending downward in its growth rate. So if that continues, North Carolina may trend towards recovery. The other 6, not so much. And I guess Alabama also. It's got a pretty high growth rate at 3%, but at least its growth rate is not accelerating. The other ones are accelerating. Arizona, the worst. Arizona is the worst. We do not often see things this bad. 9% averaged over, and that's averaged over 7 days, and it's the trend line of those. We'll look at Arizona again soon. South Carolina, Arkansas, also looking quite bad. But all of these are looking bad, really. All of these are bad. Maybe North Carolina has some hope in it, but not too much. I want to look at Arizona individually for a minute. Okay, it's just a wild scattering of dots, so the trend line does its best. Trend line believes that this is accelerating, and it's plausible. We see a lot of points up here above 10% recently. A lot of points down below zero a little bit ago. So sure, that looks like a reasonable trend line, but it's all over the map. But we have a number of 7-day periods. Each of them is a 7-day period above 10% recently, and that's really pretty bad. And accelerating, as far as we can tell. So Arizona growing sharply, truly an epidemic growth here with 9% daily growth and accelerating. Worst of the bunch. If we look at Texas, we see Texas is not good, 3% and accelerating, and has had a lot of bad days right now, recently. Texas not good. California, I know is not going to be good. Kind of looks better than Texas right now. It seems like it's got more points below the trend line. 2% growth, yeah, better than Texas right now in its growth rate. California, though, still troubled at a 2% growth rate and rising, but certainly not in that batch of really hard-hit states. Let's just take a look at Oklahoma, because that's in the news. We had a rally there. Oklahoma is looking terrible, actually. The reason that it's not in the gang of 6 or whatever is because it just doesn't have that many cases. The number of cases is quite low. 41 daily cases per million is not even worthy of notice. In daily cases per million, it's far from warm. It's quite cold, I would even say. But the trend in Oklahoma is bad. So if it's behind the other states, probably. Most states follow a trend of linear rise, short peak, slightly slower linear descent. We don't know when those cases are going to peak, but when any of these are going to peak. Maybe North Carolina is peaking now, but we do know that Oklahoma is late to the party, but it looks very much like it may follow a trend like the Gang of 6. It'll just be slower, and so they may be peaking and falling away while Oklahoma is still rising and peaking. So Oklahoma's pretty bad, not the state where I do a rally. Where would I do a rally? I mean, anything not in this list, actually. This list are all the places, it could be called states where one should not have a rally. All these ones that are the hottest in daily cases. Okay, moving on. The total rope chart, the big picture of all states together, doesn't look too bad. Here's the zero line. There are a whole lot of states that are shrinking out of the 60. They're shrinking and they're accelerating in their shrink rate. These tend to be sort of the first wave states, the second wave states, the New Yorks and the Michigans and so on. Then above here we have a sort of a wilder party of some really high numbers. Is this Hawaii again? No, that's Guam. Guam is really going crazy with 15%. Hawaii and Montana, actually. All of these low population not contributing to the numbers too much, but these are the places one would not have a rally. I do not recommend a rally in Guam at this time. Arizona, Oregon, South Carolina, Arkansas, we're seeing some of those. Some of our worst states, our Gang of 6 or Gang of 7, maybe 8 now. But again, there are a lot of states that are doing well. A lot of states are doing well, maybe even most of them. So we'll keep an eye on this chart day by day. I would kind of expect to see that gradually we'll see fewer and fewer above the zero, and it does seem to be thinning out a little bit now, so maybe that's good. Maybe we're starting to see the very beginnings of a turning of the corner of the nation of the United States. In testing, the states are doing well, as they always are and always will now. We're up above 4% total population. tested, 4% of the population tested, or at least the number tested divided by the population is 4%. Rhode Island is doing great at 20%, but there were times where these were at 0.1, so we've gotten a whole lot better on our testing, and our daily testing also. By state, we have pretty good numbers on daily testing. There's that 0.15. About half of the states are doing really well, with more than 0.15% of the population tested. There are a few, Mississippi and Hawaii, I guess, Colorado, interestingly, the testing numbers are never quite as reliable as the cases numbers. But generally, this is a pretty good graph. It's centered around 0.15, which is to be expected, since, as we saw, the United States as a whole is doing about 0.15. And there are no really terrible states in this display. So, taking a brief look at California again before we head out, because I always forget and then I have to come back. I forget what California was like as a whole. California, growing 2%, very slightly rising. It is worth noting that its last 7 days actually showing negative growth. Not enough to make a trend, but we have a short-term improvement in California. Very short-term improvement in California, but the trend line is still bad. And then California looking to turn to a warm spot any minute now, any day now. Moving on to the counties of California. Oh no, I'm not going to be able to do anything here today. I should have looked at this. I'm seeing this frequent problem I have. Maybe I can real quick fix this. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we just don't get any data from the latest day, and it just shows the same data today as yesterday. Okay, California by county. I'm in another window here. I can probably do this real quick. All I need to do is say I want to skip one day, and then I run all. I think this will work. And hopefully it'll work top down here, and I'll be able. We'll get these new reports. So right now, for instance, Los Angeles says it had 79,000 total cases as of today, or as of yesterday, really, versus 79,000, exactly the same number as of the day before. And so does Riverside, and so do all the counties. And indeed, if we look at the latest data, all of them are as though there were no new cases. So, at this point, maybe I can reload this and maybe it'll actually show me something different. I can't get that data. It's not there in the data set. It won't be until tomorrow. I'm familiar enough with this to know this. But I can regenerate throwing out that latest point. We still can get a pretty good sense from this graph of how things are going. Presuming by just mentally subtracting out that point, we can guess that Los Angeles is still growing at least a little bit, because its latest 3 points are above the trend line, but it's not terrible. Riverside also growing a little bit with its latest points above the trend line. I'm going to try reloading again and see if my latest graphs are back yet. But it really gets to be problematic when we come to the growth, the rope chart. We just can't do a rope chart where it seems like there's been zero growth for every county in the latest day. Okay, why is this not growing so as fast as I would expect? Let me see if it's actually updated its county graph yet. I'm going to zip through my... Oh, right. I have to do this other thing. Alright, do something else here. I'll just flip through some of these other graphs while I do this, but I have to tell it. I have to tell it that I really do want to upload these graphs to the website, because if I don't do right now, it automatically doesn't upload the graphs, because other people sometimes run these notebooks and we end up with everything smashed to the side, as some of you have sometimes seen. So briefly, I'm telling the notebook to upload everything, and then I'm rerunning. So while it does that, it's hanging. I might not be able to do much here today, but we can still get. See, I don't quite trust. This is close. We can get close with this graph, even with the last point broken. It's these trend lines are all pulled slightly downward by having a 0 point at the end, but the general picture is the same. Los Angeles, still the worst in new daily cases. Actually, let me adjust by population the way I like. Okay, Imperial, still the worst, adjusted by population, but we can see the latest 3 points here. Here's that one. Yeah, 3 of the latest 4 points are actually quite good. We had some really bad, crazy numbers from Imperial, 2,000 daily cases per million. They're all below 1,000 now, at least. The trend line still shows 900. And similarly with Kings, Kings not looking so good, but Imperial probably is turning the corner, as we've seen in some recent analyses. My graphs are still trying to regenerate. Let's see where they are. Still chewing through various CSV files, trying to get the data. Okay, it's graphed, and at least in my notebook now it's right, and it says it's uploaded. So let me see. There's something else that happens where even after it's uploaded, there's sometimes a delay before I get it here. Probably cached at some CDN. All right, good, finally. So I've gotten rid of the last day, now the graphs are good. And the rest will regenerate. They may not all be right yet, but I'll reload again. So same deal on this one. But now, if this does have the latest, as it seems to, it's really interesting how low some of the latest days are. We see previous days as a cluster of dots leading up to about 260, but this graph is showing yesterday's data was actually, I would say it's trending downward, which is good. Anyway, Kings, Imperial, but the real one, actually I'm going to bring in Riverside. The real one is Los Angeles, always. Really it's Los Angeles that determines how the state's total numbers are going to look. Nice to see, I guess this is a mixed bag. Los Angeles, not as sharp as Riverside, which is either good for Los Angeles or bad for Riverside. Riverside, after having a pretty good time of it a few weeks ago, now heading rather sharply upward, and is definitely a warm spot. Riverside is a daily cases warm spot at 122 from its trend line. Los Angeles is 140. It's had some points above. Its most recent points are below. With all these points below the trend line, I'm starting to think that Los Angeles is going to be turning downward in this graph. And indeed it is. Okay, and I think we started to see this yesterday, but it's really noticeable now. Los Angeles just had, so let me reload, because this might be the result of that, the data not being caught up. I just want to make sure I'm giving you good data here. Los Angeles, let's see if it's still turning downward after I've reloaded. Okay, it did correct that one really low point. No, it didn't. That point seems to be legit. The latest day, take it with a small grain of salt, because we know that there's been a little bit of problem with the latest day. The latest day was the 20th. Actually, I can figure this out. How far forward does this graph go? This graph only goes to the 19th. All right, so my rope chart still isn't updated. That's too bad. I'll try reloading in a minute. Well, actually, I'm going to give it more time to figure it out, but while we wait, let's look at testing. This will be less affected by having my graphs behind a day. Testing, 13% for San Francisco. Imperial is great, percent of population tested. Fresno is the worst, but still not bad at all at 3 some percent. Really looking pretty good. Daily testing is a little bit, the data input to this is a little shaky, so I'm never quite sure whether to trust this graph, but to the degree that we do, Kings in San Francisco, Imperial and Marin, and San Diego all above that 0.15 number. Testing is generally rising everywhere. It's generally rising. There was some wild story recently put forward by somebody that testing had been slowed down, maybe even deliberate, that there was a deliberate order to slow down testing. Not sure that I believe in that. I'm not sure I believe that order actually occurred. It may have been a joke, but I will say that there's no evidence of that here. Testing in California has not slowed down. So, and certainly not deliberately. Yeah, let's reload this now. If it doesn't work, it's fine. It doesn't work. We can still make our guesses based on we're not going to get great numbers from the rope chart. So I'm afraid I can't say today whether Los Angeles has really turned the corner, because I don't know. Wait a minute. Yeah, I don't know if that point's right. I don't think that point's right. But if we were to ignore that one low point, what do you see when you look at this graph? Is it trending downward? I'd say probably. We certainly have, even ignoring that point, out of the last few days we have down, we have in each of these is an average of, it's the week leading up to that day. So we had a negative 2% week. Before that we had a negative 8% week. Before that we had a positive 9% week. And then a 1% and a flat. And we have a lot of points below recently. One that's really high, a lot of points below, and some that are on the line. So I think it's plausible, though the trend line is incorrect slightly, it's plausible that it's around or a little below zero in spite of that point. I'll give us one. Actually, I can pull this up in my other notebook as well, just to see what does the trend line look like there. There, I know it will be right. Okay, yeah, I can't show this to you because though it's been uploaded to the site, it's cached in some CDN somewhere probably, and I don't have the very latest version. But I can say that according to the very latest version, Los Angeles has not quite turned the corner. It's not quite at zero growth, but it's at 0.2% growth. 0.2% is a low growth rate. So with Los Angeles, where were we? With Los Angeles shrinking like that, or trending towards shrinking like that, the state of California is likely to look pretty good, or will start looking better soon, because it's really going to be hard for any state. Now this is still giving us that point. Okay, well, the real point, the real latest point is a shrinkage of 2%. The very latest data point that's real is a shrinkage of 2%. And some other, and the day before it shrunk 8% on an adjusted, week adjusted basis. So Los Angeles is not growing. I think I can say that. It's not growing very much. It's holding steady, and it shows some sign perhaps of shrinking. So that's good. Especially good when you look at the whole state, or at least the hottest counties in the state. Los Angeles is unique among those. These are all slightly wrong because of that pulling down factor, but I'll do it in my other window just to make sure that, yeah, there's no huge difference between the trend lines between the correct graph and this one. This is pretty much how it actually is. There are essentially no states that are shrinking, no counties that are shrinking, with the exception of Imperial. And this is Imperial here. No counties are shrinking except Imperial, and a lot of them are accelerating upwards. We do see a few that may be going downwards, Kern or Marin, but California is still looking bad in this graph, where every county of the hottest ones, with one exception, is growing, or maybe just around zero, like Los Angeles. Los Angeles is one of the best counties in growth rate, at zero, because all the counties are growing, and many of them are accelerating. If we look at the whole picture for the entire growth graph, because I'm just an optimist, I'm going to try to reload again and see if I can get you proper data. Nope, still has all those lines below zero. All right, I don't know. It takes a few minutes. But this is also generally correct. 1%, 2% angle on some of these. They're a little lower than they should be. But the general trend is this, which is that almost all counties are growing. A handful are shrinking. but almost all counties in California are growing in daily new cases. Testing is fine, as it always is. Testing in California is fine. So I leave you with this sad graph, which we've seen for a week now or more. California, a few weeks ago, after looking kind of good, or at least balanced, has burst into epidemic mode here. Nothing really good to say about this graph. It's all the counties are growing, California is growing, everything's accelerating. I will say, as I always do, that though the graph doesn't show it, I predict a peak, and not a peak at 2,000 daily cases per million either. I predict a peak in the hundreds of daily cases per million for pretty much all these counties. No one ever goes upwards forever. They go up, and then something happens. We're not quite sure what. It causes them to peak, and they drop. What are those? What are some possible things that could cause that? It's conceivable that with absolutely nothing, no intervention, the disease itself just has that trajectory. But that doesn't seem super likely. It's an infectious disease. Why wouldn't it infect everyone? One possible reason is that that lockdowns come online. Like California knows it's in trouble, and the governor has mandated masks even in public now. The governor has just cracked down pretty hard with this mandate of masks in public, and so maybe that's what causes states to shrink before they get into the thousands of daily cases per million. Maybe it's the government doing something, mandating something, or public service announcements suggesting something. Maybe that's what makes it happen. My own theory is that it's fear, that when people start seeing these numbers, they don't necessarily care what the government says. They just know that it's a dangerous world out there, and all the news is saying it's a dangerous world out there. And it is an increasingly dangerous world out in California now. These graphs really clearly show that. It's getting more dangerous. And unless this is not even, the numbers aren't even really indicating underlying infections, but just increased testing. But I don't believe that. I think these are too sharp to just be due to increased testing. There's really an increase of infection in California, is my guess. And so people see that, and they just don't go to the grocery store as much, or they don't hang out. If they were starting to say, I can hang out with my friends now, I'm going to go to the birthday party, they're just going to say, I don't think I'm going to go to that birthday party because I've heard on the news that California has a problem. And so my guess is it's just people acting more cautiously because they are afraid of the virus, as they should be, given this graph. And that is the immune system, response of a state to this sort of thing, not a biological response, but a cultural response, a social response, a fear-based response. And I say that in a good way. I hear a lot about people acting out of fear as though that were a bad thing. I recommend being afraid of the coronavirus. It kills people. And I think that most people know that, and most people really are afraid of the coronavirus, and they're doing a lot of things they need to. But when a state starts to take off anyway, the news tells them about it, and then they get even more afraid, and they hide in their houses, and it peaks and drops away. And then there's the second wave of sort of the antibodies of a state, metaphorically speaking, which is to say, once a state has ramped up, when the state sees something like this coming, it ramps up its testing, it ramps up its hospital systems, and then if the virus comes back, then we have those, the metaphorical antibodies of the state, being improved testing, improved contact tracing, improved healthcare capacity, and probably some other things I'm not thinking of, where if it comes back, people would, if the state had it bad, like New York, or like even China is sort of showing this response right now, when it comes back, the government freaks out, very much in the way that the antibodies do, when you come across a disease again. It freaks out and just has this very strong reaction saying, we are not going back there, we've gotten over this, we are not going to go back there. And that's when you see perhaps even draconian measures to bring the thing down. So that is in the immune system of a region metaphor. What we're seeing now here is the immune system ramping up. Fear is the I don't know. I don't know how far to take this. The T cells or something. The whatever it is that builds antibodies. I don't remember my biology well enough. But the cells that create antibodies. This is what we see here in as the antibodies are being created. The metaphorical antibodies of California are being created very quickly right now, and they will put a lid on this thing. And fear is one of them. Fear is one of the antibodies of a region. And after that, I don't think we'll see it come back. But for now, we see the gang of 6 or 7 or 8 states. They've all got it bad. Their immune system has not yet handled it. The metaphorical immune system of California, we've got it bad. It has not handled it, but it's ramping up. And then for something like New York, you see they ramped up their metaphorical immune response. They handled it, and then it hasn't come back in New York. But if it does, you better bet there's going to be a serious, strong antibody response to it, metaphorically speaking. So that's the news. News is bad in California. News is bad in the United States. News is okay worldwide. And we'll just keep watching and hoping that there really is such a thing as a metaphorical immune response by region, and that the United States and California specifically are going to turn that on high. That's the news. My name is Greg Farrar. Thanks for watching.